Yesterday, the Federal Reserve announced it was ending quantitative tightening, the reducing of its balance sheet. What does that mean? Well, the Federal Reserve now has $2 trillion more in assets than it did prior to the pandemic. Assets in terms of Treasury bonds and mortgage backed securities. It also means commercial banks have almost twice as much excess reserves held at the Federal Reserve. Now, why does this even matter? Well, if the Federal Reserve is ending quantitative tightening, that means it owns $4 trillion Treasury bonds that it won't need to allow to mature. When they do mature, they'll replace them. So this is debt that the Treasury Department won't have to go out into the marketplace to replace because the Federal Reserve continues to own it. And that potentially will help keep interest rates lower because there'll be less of a supply of Treasury bonds. Now, that's the impact on interest rates, but also ending quantitative tightening allows banks to have double the amount of excess reserves that they did prior to the pandemic. Banks need reserves, they need liquidity in order to meet funding requirements, to meet liquidity ratios from a regulatory standpoint. And one of the things the Federal Reserve noticed is that banks were starting to tap the repo market that the New York Fed runs. A repo market allows banks to deposit some type of collateral, treasury bonds, treasury bills, and borrow at essentially a clearing rate. Now that repo market's pretty important because back in 2019, when there was a liquidity crunch, repo rates spiked to over 10%. This October, they spiked to 4.4%, so much lower. But the Federal Reserve felt like now there's ample liquidity and they don't want some type of funding crisis in the banking system. And as a result, they're ending quantitative tightening as of December 1st. Now, what do you think? Does any of this matter? Well, it does, but it's sort of the internal plumbing of the money market system. And hopefully this explanation helps. If you have any other questions, leave them below.